On September 1st, 1939, Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, invaded Poland, causing Great Britain and France to declare war on Germany, signaling the start of the Second World War. Eventually, tens of nations would join forces with France and Britain, including the United States and the Soviet Union, who would enter the war as the Allies to put an end to Hitler's reign of fascism in Europe. The war lasted from 1939 to 1945, but one event overshadows all others in terms of significance during the war. The Normandy landings of 1944 was the most significant triumph of the war because it clearly signaled the decline of the German Reich. The Allies triumphed against the Nazis due to their superior planning, logistical advantage, and use of new technology. However, the sheer loss of life during the attack was a tragedy. On June 6, 1944, the largest armada in history embarked across the treacherous English Channel to attack the Normandy beaches of German-occupied France in what is now known as D-Day, or officially Operation Overlord. Around 160,000 Allied soldiers, supported by 200,000 Navy men and 5,000 support craft, attacked a 45-mile stretch of Hitler's 3,000-mile-long Atlantic Wall and captured it by the end of the day, securing a foothold against Nazi Germany, which would turn the tide of World War II in favor of the Allies.
The reason why the loss of life was so great during D-Day was due to the 3,000-mile stretch of fortifications Hitler had built to protect his newly acquired land from an Allied invasion. The Allies had to find a weakness in the Atlantic Wall in order to have a foothold in Europe. To the Allies' advantage, Hitler's army was lacking sufficient resources to successfully defend the border. In order to overcome this problem, Hitler redirected most of his army that was located in Eastern Europe to the western border. He decided that the most action would be coming from the Allied front in Britain. His assumption had turned out to be correct, causing the Allies to have a more significant loss of life than if Hitler had not redirected his troops to the Eastern Front. Before the official plans, the Allies had argued about the different strategies they should use to invade the German front. The United States wanted to invade through the British Isle and the English Channel so they could directly invade Germany. The British, however, wanted to invade from the underbelly of Europe, meaning they would push through Italy and Turkey. They had hopes of avoiding the Atlantic Wall, but still taking back France at the same time. Along with these plans, the Allies had also discussed performing bombing raids on the German fronts. These discussions caused delay in the D-Day attacks, allowing Hitler's Atlantic Wall to grow stronger.
D-Day was first thought of by British Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Morgan and was decided as the best plan of attack in August of 1943. 5 months before the invasion, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected to be the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces and was instructed to enter the continent of Europe and, in conjunction with the other United Nations, undertake operations aimed at the heart of Germany and the destruction of her armed forces. However, the Allies were racing against the clock to invade because the Germans were in the process of constructing an almost impenetrable wall of fortifications. The sooner they were to attack, the less fortified France would be. The Allies organized and gathered enough supplies to triumph over the Germans in less than a year. The Allies experienced many hardships while constructing their initial plans, but they were able to overcome these hardships in a series of conferences. The Allies started their strategic planning in 1942 and 1943 at Casablanca, Washington, Quebec, Cairo, and Tehran. The Allies spent their time at these conferences planning the perfect attacks and decided that they would split the beach into 5 different fronts called Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Americans were going to storm Utah and Omaha, while the British would be storming Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Allies also planned to drop paratroopers inside of France close to the coast during pre-dawn hours, so they could cut off the Axis troops holding the Atlantic Wall. The Allies were lacking a proper supply chain when they decided to execute the D-Day invasion. Ships were needed to maintain the lifeline of the Allies in the war. The United States was supplying a considerable amount of arms for the Allies, so they had sent many convoys to Great Britain. To protect these ships from being destroyed by enemy U-boats, the Allies created convoy escorts which consisted of destroyers, corvettes, and auxiliary aircraft carriers. Although landing crafts were very prominent for armies to use, they were not a suitable option for the Allies because they could only fit so many soldiers. With this problem, the Allies decided to start producing landing ship tanks, which are also known as LSTs. Unlike landing craft, LSTs were able to accompany vehicles, supplies, and soldiers. Any LST was capable of carrying 20 Sherman tanks, 30 heavy trucks, or 2,100 tons of cargo. It is said that the LSTs were the most critical ship in World War II, creating another triumph for the Allies. Obtaining and distributing enough landing craft for the invasion proved a challenge for the Allied forces. Most of the landing crafts, or LSTs, required for the invasion were located in the Pacific Theater by the Americans and were needed to carry the soldiers and tanks. When Operation Overlord was approved, only 241 LSTs for the entirety of the European theater had been built. but the Allies needed more than 300 solely for the Normandy invasion. Back in the US, an average of 24 LSTs were being produced a month, but that still wasn't enough. The Allies took a risk by postponing the attack that was supposed to happen simultaneously with Operation Overlord on southern France by transferring the LSTs from southern France to the troops who were pushing into northern France. Because of this, 300 LSTs were available for the attack on Normandy, a risk that turned into a triumph because the invasion was successful.
America's logistical advantage had given the Allies a significant upper hand in the war. America's production of LSTs allowed the Allies to realize that they would be able to beach the landing craft by using the ebbing tide. They would do this by offloading the LSTs on the low tide and refloating them on the high tide without damaging the vehicles. The logistical advantage allowed the Allies to supply 32 fully equipped divisions and 8 armored divisions onto shore, which was deeply needed. These forces, combined with fierce air support, were able to aid the British and Canadians in capturing Caen on July 13th, another triumph for the Allies. In the 5 months leading up to the invasion, the Allies aimed to destroy the Luftwaffe, which was Germany's air force, rendering them ineffective during the planned invasion. They proved to be successful in their efforts. In March 1944, 56% of Germany's total fighters were lost in May alone, and around 25% of Germany's total fighter pilots died. Using the Americans' new and better model of airplane, the P-51, the Allies were able to render the German Air Force useless, as only around 100 German fighters were used to defend Normandy. This gave the Allies not only air superiority, but air supremacy for the invasion, a triumph for the Allies. The Allies' utilization of new technologies before the invasion was critical to the success and triumph of the Allies on D-Day. Operation Fortitude created dummy divisions of troops composed of inflatable tanks and constant false radio transmissions, which aimed to trick the Germans into thinking an invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais. The Germans fell for it, which caused Hitler to send 17 divisions to Pas-de-Calais. When news of an attack on the Normandy beaches reached Hitler, he thought it was a diversion and not the real attack. The Allies knew that they had succeeded when codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted a message between Hitler and General Erwin Rommel, who was in charge of repelling an Allied attack on Europe. Hitler told Rommel to not move any troops and await the real invasion, which could be expected 5 days after the Normandy landing, said Hitler. When the Allies eventually invaded Normandy, Hitler realized he was manipulated and ordered his generals to not let any troops fall back. The United States was pushing through the western flank successfully. During this push, the USSR launched Operation Bagration, which was the push from the eastern front.
Although the Allies triumphed greatly during the invasion of Normandy, there was an enormous loss of life as well. The bloodiest part of the battle was located on Omaha Beach. Tragically, the Allies could not plan for the bad weather during the invasion. During the attacks, there was a change in the ocean current which caused multiple LSTs to land east of their objectives, causing great confusion amongst the troops, lessening the impact of the strategically placed landing zones. Allied troops landed on unfamiliar beaches, causing many to die due to being geographically disoriented. On top of this, the weather was very stormy, rendering any air superiority and bombing mostly useless for the first few hours. This meant that the Allied forces were left to fend for themselves on the ground. The weather caused the Allies to lose many advantages. Although major headway was gained, the first day of the attacks were abysmal compared to what was planned because the Germans had a hidden infantry division that the Allies were not aware of. This German division created an immense amount of trouble for the Allies. They disabled many landing craft, which forced many troops to jump off before reaching the beaches, causing them to drown and die due to their heavy gear. Many of the brave men who made it ashore died due to heavy gunfire. In the first few hours of the invasion, some 1,200 troops were either wounded or dead. The Allied attacks were very uncoordinated at first, and the Germans had heavy mortar and artillery fire pounding the beach, as well as panzer divisions creeping into Normandy. The 21st Panzer Division arrived into Caen on June 6th, causing the British and Canadian forces to be pushed back due to a superior enemy presence.
Although the loss of life during the D-Day invasion was a tragedy, the triumph of the Allies on June 6, 1944 led to the destruction of the German war machine. As a result, democracy was saved in Europe while fascism was destroyed, and Hitler's genocide against the Jewish population was put to an end. D-Day was a tremendous triumph for the Allies in the war because it allowed for them to gain a foothold in France and caused the Axis forces to be pushed back, speeding up the victory effort. Today, D-Day is regarded as the most significant naval invasion in history because of the triumph of the Allies.